The gunshot that split the night air sent Margaret Rose diving beneath her wagon, heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. She had been traveling for 3 weeks from Missouri to the Arizona Territory, and now here she was, 12 miles outside Riverside, caught in what sounded like a range war erupting around her campsite. The darkness pressed against her like a living thing, thick and suffocating, making every shadow a potential threat. Her lantern had guttered out when she dropped it, plunging her into the absolute blackness of a moonless desert night, and the familiar panic clawed up her throat. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by the thunder of hooves. Margaret pressed herself flat against the hard ground, tasting dust and terror. She had never told anyone about her fear, this irrational, bone-deep dread of darkness that had plagued her since childhood. It seemed foolish, a weakness she could not afford on the frontier. But now, with danger all around and nothing but blackness to shield her, that old fear threatened to unmake her completely. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped somewhere near her camp. A man's voice, deep and steady, called out, "Anyone there? I am pursuing cattle thieves. If you are innocent, make yourself known." Margaret's breath caught. Was this a trick, or genuine help? She had no way of knowing, but staying silent seemed more dangerous than speaking. "I am here," she called out, hating how her voice shook. "Under the wagon. Please do not shoot. I am alone and unarmed. Stay where you are." The voice came closer, and she heard boots hitting the ground, spurs jingling softly with each step. "I am lighting a match. Do not be alarmed." The sudden flare of light made her gasp. In that brief illumination, she saw a tall man in dusty range clothes, a rifle held loosely in one hand. His face was shadowed beneath his hat, but his eyes found hers beneath the wagon, and something in his expression softened. "You can come out now, miss," he said, his voice gentler. "The thieves are gone. They were not interested in you, just running from me." The match died, plunging them back into darkness, and Margaret felt her chest constrict. "Hold on," he said quickly, seeming to sense her distress. "Let me get your lantern lit. Where is it?" "I dropped it when the shooting started," she managed. "Somewhere near the fire ring." She heard him moving, the strike of another match, then blessed, steady lamplight bloomed. The man bent down, holding the lantern so she could see to crawl out from beneath the wagon. His face was sun-weathered and strong, with a straight nose and a mouth that looked more accustomed to smiling than the serious expression he wore now. He appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30, with dark hair visible beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "I am Yates Quinn," he said, extending a hand to help her up. "I run the Double Q Ranch about 8 miles west of here. Those men stole 15 head of cattle from me tonight." Margaret took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work, the strength that pulled her easily to her feet. "Margaret Rose," she replied. "I am traveling to Riverside. I have family there, a cousin who runs a boarding house." Yates studied her for a moment, his gaze taking in her travel-stained dress, the wagon packed with her possessions, the small tent she had erected earlier. "You are traveling alone?" "Yes." She lifted her chin, defensive against the judgment she expected. "I am 22 years old and capable of taking care of myself." "I do not doubt your capability, Miss Rose." His tone was mild, not patronizing, but it is dangerous out here, especially for a woman alone. "Those thieves could have been worse than thieves, and there are other dangers. Rattlesnakes, cougars, heat sickness." He paused. "How much further were you planning to travel tonight?" Margaret glanced at the darkness beyond the lantern's glow and felt her throat tighten. "I had planned to camp here until morning. That shooting might have drawn attention. Could be more trouble coming to investigate." Yates rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I would offer to escort you to Riverside, but it makes more sense to take you to the ranch for tonight." It is closer, and my housekeeper can give you a proper room. Tomorrow, in daylight, I will take you into town myself." Every practical instinct told Margaret to accept, but pride and the lifelong habit of hiding her fear made her hesitate. "I do not want to be a burden." "It is no burden," Yates said simply. "It is the right thing to do. Besides, I would not sleep a wink knowing I left you out here alone." He tilted his head slightly. "Unless you have a reason not to trust me. I can ride into Riverside tonight and bring back the sheriff if that would make you feel safer." There was no mockery in his offer, just honest consideration for her comfort. Margaret found herself warming to this straightforward rancher. "That will not be necessary." "I accept your offer, Mr. Quinn. Thank you. Call me Yates," he said, already moving to help her break down her camp. "Mr. Quinn was my father, and he has been dead these 5 years." They worked together in companionable silence, Yates efficiently dismantling her tent while Margaret gathered her cooking supplies. His horse, a large bay gelding, stood patiently ground tied nearby. When everything was loaded back into the wagon, Yates tied his horse to the rear and climbed up onto the wagon seat. "I can drive my own wagon," Margaret protested. "I know you can," Yates replied, "but you do not know the trail to my ranch, and in the dark it is easy to lose your way. Climb up, Miss Rose. Let us get you somewhere safe." Margaret settled onto the seat beside him, acutely aware of his presence in the small space. He smelled of leather and sage, of honest sweat and desert air. When he flicked the reins and the wagon lurched forward, she gripped the edge of the seat, her eyes straining against the darkness that pressed in from all sides. They had traveled perhaps 10 minutes when Yates spoke again. "You are afraid." It was not a question. Margaret stiffened. "The shooting was frightening, yes. Not of the shooting." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Of the dark." Shame flooded through her, hot and bitter. "I do not know what you mean, Miss Rose." He did not look at her, keeping his eyes on the barely visible trail ahead. "I have been ranching since I was 15 years old. I know fear when I see it. And I saw how you reacted when the match went out, when I mentioned traveling at night. There is no shame in it." Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. She had spent years perfecting the art of hiding this weakness, of never letting anyone see, and this stranger had seen through her in minutes. "It is foolish," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fear is never foolish," Yates replied. "It kept our ancestors alive when saber-toothed tigers hunted in the dark. It is only foolish when it controls you instead of you controlling it." He paused. "Do you want to talk about it?" No one had ever asked her that before. Most people, on the rare occasions she had hinted at her fear, had dismissed it or offered useless platitudes. But Yates asked as though her answer mattered, as though her fear was worth discussing. "When I was 7, Margaret heard herself saying, "my brother and I were playing in our barn back in Missouri. We were not supposed to be there and we knew it, but it was raining and we were bored." The memory rose up, vivid and terrible. "Somehow I got locked in the root cellar. It was completely dark, no windows, no light at all. I screamed and screamed, but the rain was loud and no one heard me. I was down there for hours. By the time my father found me, I had nearly lost my mind." "How long?" Yates asked softly. 6 hours. Margaret's voice was flat now, distant. 6 hours in absolute darkness. I thought I would die there. I thought I had been forgotten, left to rot in that black hole forever. And your brother, he had run off to play somewhere else. He did not even realize I was missing until my father was already searching." She took a shaky breath. "It was not his fault. We were children. But ever since then I cannot bear the dark. Even a lamp-lit room feels oppressive at night. I sleep with 3 candles burning." Yates was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me." Margaret blinked, surprised. "That is all." No telling me I should just get over it. No suggestions about facing my fears. Would any of that help? Yates asked reasonably. Seems to me you have been living with this fear for 15 years. You must have tried everything to overcome it. And yet here you are, traveling across the frontier alone despite your fear. That takes more courage than most people will ever need. Something in Margaret's chest loosened at his words. She had never thought of it that way, as courage rather than weakness. I had to come, she said. My parents died last winter, influenza. My cousin wrote and offered me a place to stay, a chance to start fresh. I could not afford stage fare for myself and all my belongings, so I bought the wagon and team instead. What will you do in Riverside? I am not certain yet. My cousin mentioned that the schoolteacher is getting married and leaving her post. I had 2 years of teacher's college before my parents fell ill. Perhaps I could apply for the position. Margaret glanced at Yates, trying to read his expression in the dim light. What about you? How did you come to own a ranch in the Arizona Territory? My father fought in the war, Union side, Yates said. Afterward, he could not settle back into farming in Ohio. Too many memories, I think, though he never said. In 1867, when I was 13, we packed up and headed west. He claimed a section of land near the Verde River, built the ranch from nothing. Pride warmed his voice. He died of a heart attack 5 years ago, left the whole operation to me. It has been hard work, but I have tripled the herd and bought out 2 neighboring properties. The Double Q is one of the most successful ranches in the territory now. You must be proud, Margaret said softly. I am, Yates admitted, but it can be lonely. Most of my hands are good men, but they are not company, if you know what I mean. Someone to talk to, share meals with, build a life with. He cleared his throat as though embarrassed by the admission. Anyway, you will meet my housekeeper tonight. Consuela has been with my father and me since the beginning. She is like family. They crested a small rise, and Margaret saw lights in the distance. As they drew closer, the ranch house materialized from the darkness, a long adobe structure with a covered porch running the length of it. Soft golden light spilled from several windows, welcoming and warm. Other buildings clustered nearby. A barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, storage sheds. Even in the darkness, Margaret could sense the prosperity and care that had gone into building this place. Yates pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch, and before he could set the brake, the front door swung open. A plump woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged, holding a lantern high. Yates Quinn, where have you been? She demanded in accented English. I heard shots and you ride off like the devil himself is chasing you. I have been worried sick. I am fine, Consuela, Yates said, jumping down from the wagon. I caught up with the thieves, got our cattle back, and I found this young lady camping alone on the road. Miss Margaret Rose, may I present Consuela Martinez, the woman who actually runs this ranch. Consuela's expression shifted immediately from worry to concern as she took in Margaret's appearance. Alone, on the road, ay, pobrecita, come inside at once. You look exhausted. She bustled down the porch steps, reaching up to help Margaret down. Yates, get her things. The blue room, I think. It is already made up. Yes, madam, Yates said with mock solemnity, winking at Margaret. Inside, the ranch house was even more welcoming than it had appeared from outside. The main room was large and comfortable, furnished with handmade furniture that spoke of quality and care. Navajo rugs covered the wooden floor, and a massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, a low fire crackling in its depths. But what caught Margaret's attention were the lamps. They were everywhere, set on tables and shelves, filling the room with warm, steady light. Consuela noticed her looking. Yates, he likes light, she explained. Says it makes the house feel alive. Come, I will show you to your room. The blue room was at the end of a hallway, a good-sized space with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a washstand with a china pitcher and bowl. 2 lamps were already burning, casting a soft glow over everything. "The outhouse is behind the house," Consuela said, "but there is a chamber pot under the bed. I will heat water for a bath in the morning. For now you should rest. It is late, nearly midnight." "Thank you," Margaret said sincerely. "You have both been so kind." Consuela patted her arm. "It is nothing. You are safe here, do not worry. Yates is a good man, the best, and I sleep just 2 doors down if you need anything." She moved to the door, then paused. "I will leave both lamps burning, yes, in case you wake in the night." Margaret's throat tightened. Had Yates told her? Or had Consuela simply noticed? Either way, she was grateful. "Yes, please, thank you." Alone in the room, Margaret sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. The events of the evening caught up with her all at once. The terror of the shooting, the revelation of her fear to Yates, the strange comfort she had felt in his presence. She should have felt vulnerable, telling a stranger about her deepest weakness. Instead, she felt oddly lighter, as though sharing the burden had lessened its weight. A soft knock on the door brought her to her feet. "Yes, it is Yates," came the reply. "I brought your trunk and bags. May I bring them in?" Margaret opened the door, and Yates entered with her trunk balanced on one shoulder, her carpetbag in his free hand. He set them down gently near the dresser, then straightened, looking around the room. "Consuela takes good care of our guests," he said. "I hope you will be comfortable here." "I am certain I will be," Margaret assured him. "Thank you again for your kindness, Yates. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along." Yates shook his head. "I am just glad I was there." He hesitated, then said, "Miss Rose, Margaret, I want you to know, what you told me tonight about the darkness, it stays between us. I will not speak of it to anyone, not even Consuela, unless you give me leave to." The sincerity in his voice, the respect he showed for her privacy, moved Margaret deeply. "Thank you," she whispered. "And one more thing." Yates reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box of matches. "Just in case the lamps burn low during the night, so you can relight them yourself. You are in control here, Margaret. The darkness cannot touch you unless you let it." He placed the matches on the bedside table, tipped his hat, and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Margaret stood staring at the small box of matches, feeling tears prick her eyes. Such a simple gesture, but it showed an understanding, a care that no one had ever extended to her before. She changed into her nightgown, washed her face in the basin, and climbed into bed. The mattress was comfortable, the quilts soft and warm. She lay in the lamplight, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. The distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the soft murmur of voices as Yates spoke with Consuela somewhere in the house. For the first time in years, Margaret Rose felt safe in the darkness. Or rather, she felt safe despite the darkness, because Yates Quinn had given her the tools to fight it. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, and when she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window and she could smell coffee brewing. The next morning brought the crisp, clear light of an Arizona spring day. Margaret dressed in her better calico dress, brushed out her long brown hair and pinned it up neatly, then ventured out into the main room. Consuela was at the stove, cooking something that smelled heavenly, while Yates sat at the large wooden table, reading what appeared to be a livestock journal. He looked up when she entered, and his face broke into a warm smile. "Good morning, Miss Rose. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Margaret admitted. "Thank you. Sit," Consuela commanded, already pouring coffee. "Breakfast will be ready in 5 minutes. Yates, go wash your hands. You have been in the barn already this morning, I can tell." Yates obeyed with good humor, and soon they were all seated around the table, passing plates of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and fried potatoes. Margaret could not remember the last time she had eaten such a substantial breakfast. "I was thinking," Yates said, spreading butter on a biscuit, "that before I take you into Riverside you might want to see a bit of the ranch. Get a feel for the territory, see what life is like out here. Unless you are in a terrible hurry to reach your cousin," Margaret considered. She had written to her cousin, Violet Reynolds, about when to expect her, but she had built in extra time for delays. "I am not in a rush," she said slowly, "but I do not want to impose on your hospitality." "It is not an imposition," Yates assured her. "I would enjoy the company. And honestly, the double Q is something I am proud of. I would like to show it to someone who might appreciate it." There was something almost boyish in his enthusiasm, and Margaret found herself smiling. "Then I would be honored to see it." After breakfast, Yates saddled 2 horses while Margaret changed into her riding skirt. She was a competent rider, having grown up on a farm, and she settled easily into the saddle of the gentle mare Yates provided. They rode out into the morning sunshine, and Margaret caught her breath at the beauty surrounding her. The ranch sat in a valley near the Verde River, with red rock formations rising in the distance, their surfaces glowing in the morning light. The grass was surprisingly green for this time of year, Yates explained, because they had received good winter rains. Cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures, their coats glossy with health. "Over there is the main herd," Yates said, pointing to a large group of cattle in the distance. "About 300 head now. We will drive them to market in Phoenix come fall. And there," he indicated a smaller group closer to the ranch buildings, "those are the breeding cows with calves. We keep them close to watch for trouble." As they rode, Yates talked about the ranch with obvious love, pointing out the improvements he had made, the water wells he had dug, the fences he had built. But he also asked Margaret about her life, her journey, her hopes for the future. She found herself talking more freely than she usually did, sharing her love of teaching, her desire to make a difference in young people's lives. "The children out here, they need education," Yates said thoughtfully. "Most of the ranch families are too far from town for regular schooling. They get what teaching they can from their parents, but it is not the same. If you do get the teaching position, you will be making a real difference." They stopped by the river to water the horses, and Yates helped Margaret dismount. The Verde River ran clear and swift here, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. Margaret walked to the water's edge, enjoying the coolness rising from the flowing water. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Yates said, coming to stand beside her. "When things get overwhelming, I come here to think. There is something about moving water that settles the mind." Margaret glanced at him, noting the fine lines around his eyes, the strength in his profile. "Do things often get overwhelming?" "Sometimes," Yates admitted. "Running a ranch this size is a big responsibility. I have 12 men working for me, and their families depend on the wages I pay. The cattle depend on me to keep them safe and healthy. And then there are the business decisions, dealing with buyers and suppliers, watching the weather, hoping for rain but not too much, drought but not severe," he smiled. "But I would not trade it for anything. This land, this life, it is in my blood now." "You love it," Margaret observed. "I do." Yates turned to face her fully. "But I will be honest with you, Margaret. It can be lonely. My father always said a ranch is not complete without a family to pass it on to, children to teach, a partner to share the burdens and joys." He paused, then added quietly, "I have been looking for that partner for a long time, but the right woman, she has been hard to find." Margaret's heart began to beat faster. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? They had only met last night. Surely he could not be suggesting. "I am not proposing," Yates said quickly, as though reading her thoughts. That would be absurd. We have known each other less than a day, but I want you to know, Margaret, that I would like to get to know you better, to see if there might be something between us worth exploring. He met her eyes steadily. Is that something you would be open to? Margaret's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from potential hurt. But then she remembered the way Yates had respected her fear, had given her the matches, had made her feel safe. She thought about how comfortable she had felt talking with him, how natural it seemed to be in his presence. I think I would like that, she said softly. Yates's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Good, he said simply. Then let us take things slow, get to know each other properly. I will still take you to Riverside today, introduce you to your cousin, help you get settled. But maybe I could call on you. Take you to the church social next Saturday. I would like that very much, Margaret agreed. They rode back to the ranch house in companionable silence. But Margaret was intensely aware of Yates beside her. The way he sat his horse with easy confidence, the capable strength in his hands on the reins. When they arrived back, Consuela had packed Margaret's things back into the wagon and prepared a basket of food for the journey. You come back and visit, yes, Consuela said, hugging Margaret tightly. Do not be a stranger. Yates needs friends, and I think you are good for him. The ride to Riverside took about an hour and a half. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with businesses. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, the sheriff's office, and various other establishments. Yates drove the wagon to a large, neat house on the edge of town, a painted sign out front identifying it as Reynolds' boarding house. A woman in her late 30s emerged before they had even stopped, her face breaking into a delighted smile. Margaret, oh my dear, you are finally here. Violet Reynolds was plump and pretty, with kind eyes and a warm manner. She hugged Margaret enthusiastically, then turned to Yates with curiosity. Mr. Quinn, how lovely to see you. Are you acquainted with my cousin? Yates explained about finding Margaret on the road the previous night, and Violet's expression shifted from curiosity to concern to gratitude. Thank heavens you came along when you did, she said fervently. Margaret, you could have been killed or worse. You must promise me you will never travel alone like that again. I promise, Margaret said meekly. Yates helped carry Margaret's belongings into the boarding house while Violet chattered about the town, the people Margaret would meet, the opportunities available. And the school board is meeting next week to interview candidates for the teaching position, Violet said. I have already told them all about you. They are very interested in meeting you. After everything was unloaded, Yates prepared to leave. He took Margaret's hand, his grip warm and firm. I will see you on Saturday, he said. The church social starts at noon. I will pick you up at 11:30. I will be ready, Margaret promised. She watched him drive away, feeling an odd sense of loss as the wagon disappeared down the street. Violet, standing beside her, made a small humming sound. Well, well, she said. Yates Quinn, one of the most eligible bachelors in the territory, and he is clearly smitten with you. Margaret felt her cheeks heat. We only met last night, Violet. He is just being kind. Kindness does not make a man's eyes light up the way his did when he looked at you, Violet said knowingly. But come, let me show you your room. Then we can have tea and catch up properly. The week that followed was busy and pleasant. Margaret met with the school board, a group of serious-minded men and women who asked her detailed questions about her teaching philosophy and experience. She must have impressed them, because 3 days later, Violet came running into the kitchen waving a letter. You got the position, she cried. They want you to start in the fall. Oh, Margaret, this is wonderful. Margaret read the letter, her heart swelling with joy and pride. Her own position, her own classroom, a real future in this new place. She could hardly believe it. Saturday arrived bright and clear. Margaret dressed with care in her best dress, a soft blue cotton with white lace trim. Violet helped her arrange her hair, pulling it up into an elaborate style with curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," Violet said warmly. "Yates will not be able to take his eyes off you." When Yates arrived, driving a small, neat buggy instead of the wagon, he stood on the boarding house steps for a moment just looking at Margaret. "You look lovely," he said finally, his voice slightly rough. The church social was held in a large field behind the church, with tables set up for food and games organized for children and adults alike. Yates introduced Margaret to what seemed like half the territory: ranchers and their wives, townspeople, families from the surrounding areas. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and several people mentioned how pleased they were that Margaret would be teaching their children come fall. "You are already a success," Yates murmured as they filled plates from the potluck tables. "I have never seen the town take to someone so quickly." They found a shady spot under a cottonwood tree and sat on a blanket Yates had brought. The conversation flowed easily as they ate, touching on everything from favorite books to childhood memories to dreams for the future. "I have always wanted to travel," Margaret admitted. "See the ocean, visit big cities like San Francisco or New Orleans. But I also want a home, a place to belong. I suppose those two desires are somewhat at odds." "Not necessarily," Yates said thoughtfully. "A home is not a cage. With the right partner, you could have both. Travel when you want, return home when you are ready. The key is having someone who shares your dreams and wants to help you achieve them." "Is that what you want?" Margaret asked. "Someone to share dreams with?" "Yes," Yates said simply. "I have built something good here, Margaret, but it feels incomplete. I want to share it with someone, build a family, create something that will last beyond my lifetime." He paused, then added, "I know it is early days for us, but I feel like I should be honest about what I am looking for. I am not interested in courting for courting's sake. I am 30 years old and I want a wife, a partner, children. If that is not something you want, or not something you want with me, I would rather know now." Margaret appreciated his directness, even as it made her nervous. "I want those things too," she said slowly. "But Yates, there is something you need to understand about me. My fear of the dark, it is not going away. I have tried for years to overcome it and I have learned to manage it, but it is always there. If this were to become serious, you would be taking on a wife who needs lamplight to sleep, who panics in dark rooms, who might never be normal." Yates reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Margaret, listen to me. Everyone has fears, things they struggle with. Yours is just more visible than most. But it does not define you. You are brave, intelligent, kind, and determined. You traveled halfway across the country alone despite your fear. You are building a new life in a strange place. That is not weakness. That is strength." Tears pricked Margaret's eyes. "You truly do not mind." "I do not mind," Yates said firmly. "In fact, I promise you this right now. If you choose to build a life with me, I will make sure you never have to face the darkness alone. I will be your light every night for as long as we both shall live." The sincerity in his voice, the promise in his eyes, moved Margaret to her core. "That might be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me," she whispered. Yates smiled. "I am just getting started." Over the following weeks, Yates and Margaret spent as much time together as propriety and their respective responsibilities allowed. Yates would ride into town 2 or 3 times a week, taking Margaret on buggy rides through the countryside, bringing her small gifts: wildflowers, a book of poetry, a beautiful shawl. Margaret, for her part, began to prepare for the fall school term, but she also found herself thinking more and more about Yates, missing him when he was gone, lighting up when he appeared. One evening, about a month after they had met, Yates took Margaret back to the spot by the Verd River he had shown her that first day. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the water reflecting the colors like liquid gold. "I have been thinking," Yates said as they stood by the water's edge, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." Margaret's heart began to race. "And what do you want?" Yates turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want you, Margaret. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me. I want to build a life together, raise children together, grow old together. I want to be there for you every single night, keeping the lamps lit, chasing away the darkness." He took a deep breath. "I know we have only known each other for a month, and I know some people would say that is too soon. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Margaret Rose. Will you marry me?" Joy flooded through Margaret, so intense it almost hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Yates, I will marry you. I love you too." Yates pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling so widely it almost hurt. "When?" Yates asked. "How soon can we make this happen?" Margaret laughed. "Well, I suppose we should tell Violet first, and Consuela. They will want to help plan everything." "Next month," Yates said decisively. "I do not want to wait any longer than that. We can have the wedding at the ranch, invite everyone we know." "What do you say?" "Next month sounds perfect," Margaret agreed. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Violet was beside herself with excitement, immediately taking charge of the wedding arrangements. Consuela, when they told her the news, actually cried with happiness, hugging Margaret and declaring that she had been praying for Yates to find a good woman. Margaret's wedding dress was made by the town seamstress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with delicate lace detailing. Yates ordered special lanterns from Phoenix, beautiful glass and brass pieces that would light the ranch house with warm, steady light. He also surprised Margaret by building an addition onto the house, a large bedroom with windows on 3 sides to let in as much natural light as possible. "I want you to feel safe in our home," he explained when he showed it to her. "I want you to love being there as much as I do." The wedding day arrived sunny and warm. The ranch yard had been transformed, with tables set up for the feast, flowers brought in from as far as Prescott, chairs arranged in rows for the ceremony. It seemed like everyone in the county had come to celebrate. Margaret, waiting in Consuela's room to make her entrance, felt surprisingly calm. Violet fussed with her dress and hair, but Margaret's eyes kept drifting to the window, where she could see Yates standing under the flower-draped arbor he had built, looking handsome in a new black suit. "Are you ready?" Violet asked softly. Margaret took a deep breath and nodded. "I have never been more ready for anything in my life." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The circuit preacher had made a special trip to perform the service. Margaret walked down the makeshift aisle on Violet's arm, her eyes locked on Yates, who was looking at her as though she were the most precious thing he had ever seen. When they exchanged vows, Yates added something that was not traditional. "I promise to be your light in the darkness," he said, his voice clear and strong. "Every night for all our nights together. This I swear before God and all these witnesses." Margaret felt tears slip down her cheeks as she replied, "And I promise to share my life with you, to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, to build a home and family with you. This I swear with all my heart." The kiss that sealed their marriage was met with cheers and applause from the assembled guests. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice the number of people present. As the sun began to set and guests started to depart, Yates and Margaret stood together on the porch, waving goodbye. Finally, the last wagon disappeared down the road, and they were alone except for Consuela, who was directing the ranch hands in the cleanup efforts. "Time to light the lamps," Yates said softly, taking Margaret's hand. Together they walked through the house, lighting every lamp, filling their new home with warm, golden light. In their bedroom, Yates had placed no fewer than 6 lamps, ensuring that even the corners were illuminated. "It is beautiful," Margaret whispered, looking around the room that would be their sanctuary. "You are beautiful," Yates replied, drawing her close. "My wife. I still can hardly believe it." That night, as they lay together in their lamplit room, Margaret felt a peace she had never known before. The darkness outside was absolute, the Arizona night deep and vast. But here in this room, in Yates's arms, she felt no fear. He had kept his promise. He was her light. The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and joy. Margaret taught at the Riverside School, riding into town 3 days a week to educate the children who could attend regularly. On the other days, she held classes at the ranch for the children of the ranch hands and neighboring families, a solution that pleased everyone. Yates supported her work completely, even building a small schoolroom near the main house so she would have a proper space to teach. The rhythm of ranch life suited Margaret better than she had expected. She learned to help with the bookkeeping, to manage the household alongside Consuela, to understand the cycles of cattle raising and land management. Yates, in turn, proved to be as good a husband as he had promised. He never failed to light the lamps each evening, never made her feel foolish for her fear, and his patience and love were unwavering. Their first real test came in the winter of their first year together. A severe storm rolled in, the kind that old-timers said came only once in a decade. The wind was fierce enough to extinguish any lamp near a window, and the rain pounded the roof with deafening intensity. Margaret felt the old panic rising as lamp after lamp had to be moved away from windows to keep them from going out. Yates noticed immediately. "I have an idea," he said, disappearing into the storage room. He returned with an armload of candles, the thick, sturdy kind that burned for hours. "We will put these all around the room. The wind cannot touch them if we keep the doors closed." They worked together, setting up dozens of candles throughout the main room and bedroom. The effect was magical, like being inside a glowing cave. Margaret sat on the sofa, watching Yates move around the room, his face serious with concentration as he made sure she would feel safe. "There," he said finally, coming to sit beside her. "A fortress of light, the darkness does not stand a chance." Margaret leaned against him, feeling the familiar warmth of his presence. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding, for never making me feel broken." "You are not broken," Yates said firmly, wrapping his arm around her. "You are the strongest woman I know, and I am honored to be the one who gets to keep your lights burning." The storm raged for 3 days, but inside the ranch house, Margaret felt nothing but safe and loved. Spring brought unexpected news. Margaret had been feeling unwell for several weeks, tired and nauseated. When Consuela suggested the reason, Margaret was stunned. A baby. Could it be possible? The doctor in Riverside confirmed it. Margaret was pregnant, due in late autumn. When she told Yates, he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Margaret suffered from severe morning sickness well into her second trimester, and the summer heat made her uncomfortable and irritable. But Yates was patient and attentive, bringing her cool water, sitting with her during the worst of it, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings. As her belly grew, so did her fears. "What if I cannot be a good mother?" she asked Yates one night, What if my fear affects our child? You will be a wonderful mother, Yates assured her. And our child will grow up knowing that fears are nothing to be ashamed of. That courage means facing life despite being afraid. That is a valuable lesson, Margaret. In late October, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him William after Yates's father. When the midwife placed the tiny bundle in Margaret's arms, she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered, counting the tiny fingers and toes. Yates, sitting beside the bed with tears streaming down his face, could only nod. William proved to be a good baby, sleeping well and eating heartily. But Margaret noticed something interesting. He seemed to prefer a dimly lit room for sleeping. Too much light actually seemed to disturb him. It was Consuela who pointed out the irony. "Your son, he likes the dark," she said with amusement. "Maybe he will help his mother learn there is nothing to fear." And strangely, it proved to be true. Margaret found that she could sit in William's darkened nursery without panic, because her focus was on him, not on her fear. Slowly, gradually, she began to reclaim pieces of herself that the fear had taken. The years passed in a happy blur. William was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Emma, who had her father's dark hair and her mother's brown eyes. 3 years after that, another son, James, completed their family. The ranch continued to prosper, and Yates's reputation as a fair and successful rancher grew throughout the territory. Margaret continued to teach, though she reduced her hours to focus on her growing family. She found immense satisfaction in educating the children of the community, watching them grow and learn. Many of her students went on to further education, several even attending college, something that filled her with pride. As the children grew, Margaret found her fear of the dark continuing to diminish. It never left entirely. She still preferred lamplight in the evenings, still felt uneasy in truly dark spaces, but it no longer controlled her life. Yates had kept his promise, faithfully lighting lamps every evening, but now it was as much tradition as necessity, a ritual that marked the transition from day to night, from work to rest. One evening, when Margaret was in her early 30s, she sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Yates came out to join her, settling into the chair beside hers with a contented sigh. "Long day?" Margaret asked. "Good day," Yates corrected. "The new calves are thriving, the hands are working well together, and I get to come home to you. I would say that makes for a very good day." Margaret smiled, reaching over to take his hand. "Do you remember the night we met? You finding me under that wagon, terrified of the dark and danger?" "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever met," Yates said. "Traveling alone, facing your fears head-on, determined to build a new life." "I remember thinking you were my hero," Margaret admitted. "This strong, kind man who did not laugh at my weakness, who promised to keep the lamps lit. I fell a little bit in love with you that very first night." Yates raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Best night of my life finding you. Everything good in my life now comes from that moment." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Inside the house, they could hear the children's voices as Consuela supervised their evening meal. The sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. "I should light the lamps," Yates said, starting to rise. Margaret held his hand, keeping him in his seat. "Wait," she said softly. "Just for a moment. Let us watch the stars come out together." Yates settled back down, understanding. The darkness that had once terrified her was now just another part of the day, no more threatening than the sunrise. She had not conquered her fear entirely, might never fully conquer it, but she had learned to live with it, around it, despite it. And she had learned something else. That true love meant accepting someone completely, fears and flaws and all. Yates had done that for her, had kept his promise to be her light every single night. But in doing so, he had also given her the courage to find her own light within. As full darkness fell and the stars multiplied overhead, Yates finally stood and went inside to light the lamps. Margaret followed him, pausing in the doorway to look back at the night sky one last time. It was beautiful, she realized. The darkness held beauty too if you had the courage to look. The children came running to greet them, William telling an elaborate story about something that had happened at school, Emma showing off a picture she had drawn, James demanding to be picked up. Margaret gathered them close, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude. This life, this family, this home filled with light and love, it was everything she had never known she wanted. And it had all begun with a moment of vulnerability, a confession of fear, and a rancher's promise to be her light. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and growth. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books almost as much as he loved working alongside his father on the ranch. Emma proved to have a gift for music, and Yates surprised them all by bringing home a piano from Phoenix, hauled carefully across the rough roads. James was the adventurer, always climbing trees or exploring the far reaches of the ranch, giving his mother regular frights. When William turned 12, he asked his mother about her fear of the dark. They were sitting in the kitchen, just the two of them, shelling peas for dinner. "Aunt Violet told me you used to be very afraid of the dark," William said, his young face serious. "Is that why we always have so many lamps lit?" Margaret paused in her work, considering how to answer. She had always been honest with her children, believing they deserved truth more than pretty lies. "Yes," she said simply. "When I was a little girl, something frightening happened to me in the dark. It left me with a fear I carried for many years." "But you are not afraid anymore?" William asked. "I am still afraid sometimes," Margaret admitted. "But your father taught me that being afraid is not the same as being weak. He promised to help me face my fear, to be my light when I needed it, and he has kept that promise every single day." William thought about this for a moment. "That is what love is it not? Helping someone with their hard things." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes at her son's wisdom. "Yes, sweetheart, that is exactly what love is." That conversation seemed to mark a turning point for William. He began emulating his father even more consciously, learning not just the skills of ranching but the character traits that made Yates such a good man. Reliability, kindness, the ability to see people's needs and meet them without being asked. Emma, at 10 years old, was already showing signs of becoming a beauty, but more importantly, she had inherited both her parents' determination and intelligence. She announced one evening that she intended to become a doctor, a declaration that made Consuela gasp and Yates choke on his coffee. "Women can be doctors," Emma insisted, her chin set stubbornly. "Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell is a doctor. I read about her in Mother's book. If she can do it, so can I." Yates recovered his composure and smiled at his daughter. "You are absolutely right, Emma. If that is your dream, your mother and I will do everything we can to help you achieve it." Margaret, watching this exchange, felt her heart swell with pride. This was the legacy she and Yates were creating. Children who believed they could accomplish anything, who saw obstacles as challenges to overcome rather than reasons to give up. Young James, only 7, was still figuring out his place in the world, but he had a gift for making people laugh and a heart big enough for everyone he met. He was the one who befriended the shy new student at school, who brought home injured animals to nurse back to health, who could not bear to see anyone sad. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Yates expanded the operation, buying more land, increasing the herd. He hired more hands, built new facilities, and became known throughout the territory as one of the most successful ranchers in Arizona. But success never changed him. He remained the steady, kind man Margaret had fallen in love with, the man who never forgot to light the lamps each evening. The Arizona Territory achieved statehood in 1912, a momentous occasion that the whole family celebrated. By then, William was 20, working the ranch full-time alongside his father and showing every sign of being ready to take over the operation someday. Emma was 18 and had been accepted to a women's medical college in California, a triumph that made the whole family proud despite the reality that she would soon be far from home. James, at 15, was still finding his way but showing an interest in law, talking about becoming a lawyer who could help ranchers navigate the increasingly complex regulations they faced. One evening, as Margaret and Yates sat on their porch watching another spectacular sunset, Yates turned to his wife with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about that night I found you under your wagon?" he asked. "I think about it often," Margaret admitted. "It was the night my life truly began. Everything good I have now traces back to that moment." "I think about it too," Yates said softly. "I think about how close I came to riding right past your camp, to never meeting you. The thieves had gotten away and I was angry, ready to just go home. But something told me to check that campfire I saw in the distance." Margaret took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Yates. Call it fate, providence, God's plan, whatever you like, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Nor I without you," Yates replied. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "You know, you have not needed me to light the lamps in quite some time. You do it yourself now most evenings." Margaret realized he was right. Somewhere along the way, without even noticing, she had started handling the evening lighting herself, no longer waiting for Yates to do it for her. The fear that had once paralyzed her had been worn down by years of facing it in the safety of Yates's love. "I suppose I do not need you the same way I used to," she said slowly. "But I still want you, Yates. I will always want you. The need was born of fear, but what we have now, it is so much deeper and better than that." Yates smiled, that warm, wonderful smile that still made her heart skip. "I will still light the lamps for you whenever you want," he said. "It is not about need anymore. It is about love, about showing you every day that I am here, that I remember my promise." "And I love you for it," Margaret said softly. "I love you for all of it. For seeing past my fear to who I really was, for keeping your promise, for building this life with me." They sat together as darkness fell, and this time, neither of them moved to light the lamps right away. They simply sat in the gathering dusk, comfortable in each other's presence, secure in a love that had been tested and proven over more than 20 years together. Eventually, of course, they did light the lamps. The house blazed with warm light, a beacon that could be seen for miles across the darkening desert. Inside, 3 grown children laughed and talked. Consuela hummed as she prepared tomorrow's bread, and Margaret Rose Quinn stood at the window, looking out at the night with contentment rather than fear. Emma left for medical school that fall, a bittersweet departure that left the house feeling oddly empty. But she wrote faithfully every week, sharing her experiences, her challenges, her triumphs. When she came home for the holidays, she was bubbling with enthusiasm for her studies, full of plans for the future. "I want to come back here when I finish," she told her parents. "The territory, I mean, Arizona. There are so few doctors serving the ranching communities, the mining towns, the places outside the cities. I could make a real difference." "You will make a difference wherever you go," Margaret assured her daughter, "but we would love to have you come back home." William, meanwhile, had met a young woman named Sarah, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. She was practical and hardworking, with a quick smile and a genuine love for ranch life. When William announced his intention to marry her, the whole family celebrated. The wedding was held at the Double Q, just as Yates and Margaret's had been, and it seemed like history repeating itself in the best possible way. Sarah fit into the family seamlessly, working alongside Margaret and Consuela, bringing fresh energy and ideas to the household. Within a year, she and William welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Grace. Margaret, holding her granddaughter for the first time, felt the circle of life completing itself in a beautiful way. "Your great-grandfather William would be so proud," she whispered to the sleeping infant. 4 generations connected by this land, this ranch, this family. Yates, now in his 50s but still strong and vital, took to grandfatherhood with enthusiasm. He could often be found with little Grace on his shoulders, showing her the ranch, telling her stories, teaching her to love this land as he did. James finished his schooling and, true to his word, went to study law. But unlike Emma, he chose to stay closer to home, studying in Phoenix and coming back to the ranch every chance he got. He had fallen in love with the daughter of the Riverside sheriff, a spirited young woman named Ruth, who shared his passion for justice and fairness. The years rolled on, marked by births and deaths, joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Consuela passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, leaving a hole in the family that nothing could quite fill. They buried her on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree by the river, in a spot she had always loved. Emma finished medical school and returned home, setting up a practice in Riverside that served patients from miles around. She never married, claiming she was married to her work, but she lavished her considerable capacity for love on her nieces and nephews, of which there were soon several. William and Sarah had 3 children, James and Ruth had 4, and the ranch house often rang with the laughter and chaos of family gatherings. Margaret, watching her family grow and flourish, sometimes marveled at the journey that had brought her here. That terrified young woman under the wagon seemed like a different person now, someone from a distant past. She had grown into herself over the years, had found strengths she never knew she possessed, had built a legacy that would last long after she was gone. Her teaching career had spanned 3 decades before she finally retired, and she took pride in knowing that dozens of children had received a better education because of her efforts. Some of her former students were now teachers themselves, passing on what she had taught them. As Yates and Margaret entered their 60s, they began to slow down, handing more and more of the ranch operations to William while still remaining involved in the decisions that shaped its future. They spent their evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over land they had loved and worked for more than 30 years. One such evening, Margaret turned to Yates with a question that had been on her mind. "Do you have any regrets? Things you wish you had done differently?" Yates considered for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I have been blessed beyond measure. A wife I love more today than I did the day I married her, children who make me proud, grandchildren who bring joy into my twilight years, land that has prospered under my care. What could I possibly regret?" "I thought you might regret tying yourself to a woman with such foolish fears," Margaret said softly. "I cost you things, Yates, the ability to travel freely, to live without constantly thinking about lamps and candles and light." Yates took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Margaret Quinn, you listen to me. You have never been a burden, not for one single day. Yes, we have always had our lamps and our routines, but that is just part of who we are. And you know what? I have come to love the ritual of lighting the lamps each evening. It marks the end of the workday, the beginning of our time together. It is romantic in its own way. Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. "I love you," she whispered. "After all these years, I love you more than ever." "And I love you," Yates replied. "My light in the darkness, my partner in everything, the best decision I ever made." They sat together as the stars emerged, and true to his word, Yates rose to light the lamps, moving through the house with practiced ease, creating the warm glow that had defined their home for decades. The years continued their relentless march. Yates developed problems with his heart, nothing immediately dangerous but a reminder that they were not young anymore. Margaret's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, making it difficult to do the fine sewing she had once enjoyed. But they faced these challenges together, adjusting to the limitations age imposed while still finding joy in each day. When Yates turned 70, the family threw a massive celebration at the ranch. Children, grandchildren, neighbors, friends, everyone who had been touched by his life gathered to honor him. Speeches were made, stories were told, and through it all, Yates sat with Margaret's hand in his eyes shining with contentment. 70 years, he said during his own speech, his voice still strong despite his age. "I have been on this earth for 70 years, and for more than 40 of them I have been blessed to share my life with Margaret. She has made me a better man, a better father, a better steward of this land. And I want everyone here to know, I have kept my promise. Every single night for more than 40 years, I have made sure the lamps were lit, the darkness kept at bay. It has been my honor and my joy to be her light." There was not a dry eye in the gathering as Yates sat down. Margaret, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks, leaned over and kissed him, not caring who was watching. Emma, now a respected physician in her 50s, stood next. "My father taught me that love is action, not just words," she said. "He showed me every day what it means to keep a promise, to put someone else's needs alongside your own, to build a life on a foundation of respect and care. That is the legacy he and my mother have given us, and it is the standard I measure everything against." William spoke next, his own hair now graying at the temples. "This ranch, this land, it is more than just a business to me. It is a trust, a legacy passed down from my grandfather to my father, and someday I will pass it to my own children. But more than the land and cattle, what I have inherited is the knowledge of how to be a man of integrity, how to keep promises, how to love well. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mom, for everything." Even young James, now a successful lawyer with offices in both Riverside and Phoenix, spoke of the impact his parents had made. "I spend my days dealing with contracts and agreements," he said, "and I can tell you that most of them are not worth the paper they are written on. But there is one promise I have seen kept faithfully, every single day of my life, my father's promise to be my mother's light in the darkness. That has taught me more about the value of keeping your word than any law book ever could." The celebration continued long into the night, but eventually the guests departed, the grandchildren were tucked into beds throughout the house, and Yates and Margaret were alone in their room. "Quite a day," Yates said, slowly changing into his nightshirt. "Quite a life," Margaret corrected, smiling at him. "We have built something wonderful, Yates. Not just the ranch, but this family, these relationships, this love. It will outlast us both." "I hope so," Yates said. "That is the best kind of legacy, the kind that lives in people's hearts and choices, not just in land and buildings." They climbed into bed, and Margaret settled against Yates's shoulder as she had done thousands of times before. The lamps burned steadily around the room, their light warm and constant. "Thank you," Margaret whispered, "for keeping your promise, for all these years of lighted lamps and love." "Thank you," Yates replied, "for trusting me with your fear, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by light and love. Several more years passed, gentle years filled with the quiet satisfactions of old age. Grandchildren grew into adults, some staying on the ranch, others venturing out into the wider world. Great-grandchildren arrived, keeping the house noisy and full of life. Yates's heart grew weaker, and the doctor finally confined him to the house, forbidding the long days of ranch work he had always loved. It was a hard adjustment, but William was more than capable of running the operation, and Yates found satisfaction in serving as an advisor, in spending more time with Margaret. They were both in their mid-70s when Yates fell seriously ill. Pneumonia, the doctor said, common in older people and often fatal. The family gathered, faces drawn with worry as they waited to see if Yates would recover. Margaret sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, remembering their life together. On the third night of his illness, as fever raged through his body, Yates's eyes opened with sudden clarity. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I am here," she assured him, leaning close. "I am right here, my love." "The lamps," he said urgently. "Did I light the lamps?" Margaret looked around the room, seeing the half-dozen lamps burning brightly. "Yes, darling, the lamps are all lit. Everything is bright and warm." Yates relaxed slightly. "Good," he breathed. "I promised. Every night, had to keep my promise." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. "You have kept it," she told him fiercely. "Every single night for more than 40 years you have kept your promise. You have been my light, Yates. In every way that matters, you have been my light." "Love you," Yates whispered, his eyes drifting closed again. "So much." "I love you too," Margaret replied, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Rest now. I will keep the lamps burning. You taught me how." Whether Yates heard her, she could not tell, but his breathing eased, becoming deeper and more regular. The fever broke that night, and by morning he was on the road to recovery, though he would never regain his full strength. The experience changed something in both of them. They became even more focused on the present, on savoring each moment together, knowing that their time was growing shorter. They spent long hours talking, reminiscing, sharing memories and dreams. One evening, about 6 months after Yates's illness, they sat on their porch watching yet another spectacular Arizona sunset. The sky was ablaze with orange and purple, the clouds edged in gold, the whole world seeming to glow with color. "It is beautiful," Margaret said softly. "I never get tired of watching the sun set." "Neither do I," Yates agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Margaret, I need you to promise me something." She looked at him, alarmed by the serious tone. "What is it, when I am gone?" Yates began. "Yates, do not talk like that," Margaret interrupted. "Hush now, let me say this." He took her hand gently. "When I am gone, I do not want you to be afraid of the dark anymore. I want you to know that my love for you, it does not end when I do. I will still be with you in every lamp you light, in every sunrise and sunset, in the faces of our children and grandchildren. The darkness is not something to fear, Margaret. It is just the other side of light, and neither can exist without the other." Margaret was crying now, unable to stop the tears. "I do not want to think about losing you. I know, love, but we both know it is coming sooner or later. And I want you to be okay when it happens. I want you to keep living, keep loving, keep being the amazing woman you are. Can you promise me that?" Margaret could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to nod. "I promise." They sat together until full dark had fallen, and then Margaret rose to light the lamps, moving through the house with hands that shook only slightly, bringing light to chase away the shadows. Yates lived for 2 more years, years filled with love and family and the simple pleasures of a life well lived. He died peacefully in his sleep on a cool autumn night, Margaret beside him, the lamps burning brightly around their bed. The grief was overwhelming at first. Margaret wandered through the house like a ghost, unable to believe that Yates was truly gone. The family rallied around her, taking turns staying with her, making sure she was never alone. But it was Emma who finally got through to her mother. "Mama," she said gently, about a week after Yates's funeral, "you are not honoring him by falling apart. He loved you too much for that. He would want you to keep living, to keep being the strong, capable woman he fell in love with." Margaret knew her daughter was right, but moving forward seemed impossible. "I do not know how to do this without him," she admitted. "Yes, you do," Emma said firmly. "You have been doing it all along. Dad was your partner, your support, but you were never helpless, Mama. You have your own strength. You just forgot it for a moment." That evening, Margaret went through the house alone for the first time since Yates's death. As dusk fell, she paused, remembering all the evenings Yates had moved through these same rooms, lighting lamp after lamp, keeping his promise. With trembling hands, she lit the first lamp, then the second, then the third. She moved through the house, bringing light to every room, and with each lamp she felt a little bit of her strength returning. When she was done, she stood in the main room, surrounded by the warm glow of dozens of lamps, and she could almost feel Yates's presence, his approval, his love. "I will be okay," she whispered to the empty room. "I promise, my love, I will be okay." And she was. Margaret lived for another 8 years after Yates's death. Years spent surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She continued to light the lamps every evening, honoring Yates's memory, but also honoring herself, the woman she had become through their life together. She told stories about Yates to the youngest generation, making sure they knew about the man who had built the ranch, who had kept his promise, who had loved so well. She showed them the spot by the river where Yates had proposed, the porch where they had watched thousands of sunsets together, the bedroom where they had shared more than 40 years of marriage. When Margaret died peacefully at the age of 84, surrounded by her family, her last words were about light and love. "Keep the lamps burning," she whispered. "Remember to be each other's light. That is what love is. That is what family is." They buried her beside Yates, under the big cottonwood tree near the ranch house. The whole community turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact she had made during her long life. William, now in his 60s himself, stood to speak at the service. "My mother was afraid of the dark," he said, his voice steady despite his grief. "And my father promised to be her light every night. He kept that promise faithfully until the day he died. But what my father gave my mother, beyond the simple act of lighting lamps, was the courage to face her fear. Over the years, she grew stronger, braver, more confident. She became the light herself. And that is the legacy she has left us. Not fear overcome, but fear transformed into strength. Not darkness vanquished, but darkness accepted as part of the cycle of life. Love, real love, deep love, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond, that is the greatest light of all." As the family gathered back at the ranch after the funeral, someone noticed that all the lamps in the house were burning brightly, though no one could remember lighting them. Emma smiled through her tears, recognizing the touch of her brother William, carrying on the tradition their father had started and their mother had continued. The Double Q Ranch thrived for generations after Yates and Margaret were gone. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren carried on the legacy they had built, not just of successful ranching, but of love, promise-keeping, and family. The story of the rancher who promised to be his wife's light every night became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. And on quiet evenings when the lamps were lit throughout the old ranch house, descendants swore they could feel the presence of Yates and Margaret, still together, still in love, still keeping their promises across the veil of death. The fear that had once defined Margaret Rose had been transformed by love into something beautiful and lasting. The darkness she had dreaded became just another part of the natural cycle, no more threatening than day turning to night. And the light, the precious light that Yates had promised to provide, had grown beyond simple lamps and candles into something eternal. The light of love, of family, of promises kept and honored across the generations. In the end, that was their true legacy. Not land or cattle or buildings, but love. Deep, abiding, transformative love that had the power to chase away any darkness, to overcome any fear, to build something that would last forever. And somewhere in whatever lies beyond this life, Yates Quinn still kept his promise, lighting lamps for his beloved Margaret, their love shining like a beacon across eternity, a light that would never, ever go out.